is Ben Seyfert. I'm a lecturer here at UCSB in the Germanic and Slavic department. And I am here with Jan Christopher Horak, who was for a long time, very long time, the director of the UCLA Film and Television Archive, and is an esteemed scholar, very famous for his knowledge on the exiles in Hollywood from Germany, but also the Weimar era, and who's actually met our director personally.
Yes, we can talk about that. And I'm now teaching at UCLA.
That's right.
Well, I've been teaching at UCLA for a long time, but now,
and
since I retired from the archive, now
that's right.
I'm only teaching. So, how do you want to start?
Well, why don't you tell us how you came to study this era specifically, and what made you get to know Thiele personally?
Well, it's kind of funny because you know, Ben and I have known each other about 10 years, and he did a project on Thiele at the Scoreball in Los Angeles, and told me, and then mentioned that I had done an interview with Thiele, which I did even before I started my graduate work. I got an American Film Institute oral history to interview German Jewish refugees from Berlin and Vienna who had gone to Hollywood. And I came to Los Angeles in the summer of '75, and frankly, was 24 years old and didn't know anything about anything, and certainly not anything about German Jewish refugees. I mean, that was part of the reason I was doing these oral histories. So there was a guy at the AFI who had been a well-known critic named James Powers, and he was married to Karen Verne, who was also one of the emigres. And so through him, he supplied me with names of people to go interview, and one of them was Wilhelm Thiele. And so I went to Brentwood. By the way, got arrested before I got there because at that time I had to use public transportation. And if you think public transportation is bad now, especially in LA, it was much worse then. And so I was picked up by the Brentwood cops because I was walking through Brentwood instead of riding, and they thought I was, you know, looking for houses to scope out.
Actually, the first time this must be a European thing, because the first time that I came to the States from Switzerland, where I grew up, I was strolling, and some cops stopped me and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm walking." And they said, "Where are you walking to?" And I said, "Well, I'm just walking." And they said, "You know that loitering is illegal," and my English wasn't that good, so I thought they meant littering, which to me was different from loitering, apparently. Yeah.
I was only coming from Boston, where it was great public transportation.
But I didn't get arrested, thank goodness.
But anyway, I did the interview with Wilhelm Thiele and his wife. He was 85 at the time and was already having real memory issues, but his wife had a photographic memory, and so she really helped out on that. So anyway, that series of interviews that I did in '75 eventually became a part of my dissertation, which I finished 9 years later, on anti-Nazi films made by German Jewish refugees. And from that point on, it's been one of the topics I've kind of dealt with over my career.
By the way, the wonderful interview is in the book that's just off the press, Enchanted by Cinema. Speaking of dissertations, actually, I met Chris before even I started my dissertation, but then I came back, and Chris gave me some of the best advice that you could ever get if there's some PhD students out here tonight. Do you want to say it? I don't want to misquote you. I've been misquoting you for a while.
No, you can say. I just said it to you. You can say it.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
That it's not a question of intelligence, but a question of stamina.
Correct.
He also said something else to me, which I didn't tell you again, so maybe I'm going to misquote you on this one. But you said that nobody is likely ever going to read you once you've written it, which is, he's not speaking from experience because his dissertation is still being quoted to this day. So, yes.
Well, that was because I had the good fortune of doing this at a time when in Germany, the previous generation of professors were all still from the Nazi period. And so no one, I mean, the topic of immigration, of the Holocaust, etc., was just not a topic being dealt with at German universities, and I did it in Münster. And here as an American, I come there and I decided, well, I'm going to do this. And so it became literally one of the first books out on that particular topic. But let's talk about the film.
Absolutely.
So, Drei von der Tankstelle, Three from the Gas Station, is that the English title?
We translated it as Three Good Friends because I think that was the release title they had in New York back when the movie was first
This
shown.
is one of the earliest sound films made in Germany. Thiele had done one before that, also with Willy Fritsch and Lillian Harvey, the stars, called Love Waltz, Liebeswalzer.
Made in two versions, English and German.
And the UFA, the film company that produced it, and Eric Palmer was the producer, their claim to fame in these early musicals is that they literally created a new genre, and that was the film operetta. And these films were hugely popular. Three Good Friends was the #1 box office hit of 1930.
In Germany?
In Germany.
And in Europe, very, very successful.
A year later, The Congress Dances by Erich Charel, also produced by Palmer with a different director.
But also with Lillian Harvey and Willy Fritsch.
With Willy Fritsch, again, first in box office. But they weren't just popular, they were formally really experimental. And you see that in this film. In this film, if you compare American even musicals from 1930 and this one, you see how far, much more advanced this one is. First of all, that opening montage where they're riding in the car and you get this real quick editing. The scene with the moving furniture, and there are all of these attempts to do what Hollywood never did, and that is make the audience self-conscious and aware of the fact that they're watching a film. So it's a very self-conscious film in that sense.
You were just addressed by the actors, right? Coming out, just like in the theater, addressing you, looking down at you in the audience.
Direct address. I mean, the only director who was doing that in Hollywood, who also was specializing in musicals, was Ernst Lubitsch.
Another
in Love
German.
Parade and other films, you get that direct address too. So, but the structure of this film is of a classic operetta. So, in the classic operetta, you have basically the narrative involves the creation of three different couples. You have the main kind of love couple, the hero and the heroine, in this case, Willy Fritsch and Lillian Harvey. Then you have the secondary couple who usually cannot get together until the first couple has. And in this case, it's the father, the consul, and Olga Chechova, his girlfriend. And then you have, as a third couple, you have what in opera is called a buffo couple, a comedic couple. And here, that's taken over by Oskar Karlweis and Heinz Rühmann as a kind of at least insinuated gay couple too.
So let's talk about it. This is a very traditional, structural-wise, very traditional play. However, what's going on within it, the gender dynamics, the topics, all of this is cutting edge at this time. We're in 1929. Let's bring our mind back. The Wall Street crash just happened. This movie was shot in the summer of 1930. So all of this is on people's minds. People are going to the movies, they want to be entertained, but they're getting this movie where not only are they entertained and they're given a fantasy, but they're also made to think. And we have very interesting gender dynamics. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Why don't you talk about it?
Okay. Well,
You started.
That's true, I started it. So if we think about it, in this specific period, we have the rise of Nazism as well as the rise of communism that's coming to a head here. In 1930, we have some of the first votes that are being cast for Nazi party members. We have people in the streets that are protesting because they are out of work because of the rise of unemployment. And here comes a film that is telling you, be happy, but also think of all the hope and all the things that could happen if we go into this direction. And what is this direction that Thiele is showing us? It's a direction where women are in charge, where gender dynamics are in flux, where women play with dolls, but dolls are men, and we switch and women are in the driver's seat. These are all things that stand for the Weimar Republic, that stand for this very, very young democracy. 1919 is when the war ended and the empire was deposed, and a democracy for the first time was installed in Germany. And all of these new dynamics started emerging. Jews were first given a prominent role in culture and in society, a shaping role. And all of this is something that this movie says is worth fighting for.
So it's Zikr Krakauer, who some of you have may read, is one of the foremost writers on that history. He was a feared critic for the Frankfurter Zeitung in 1930, and he hated this film and these kinds of films. And so it's interesting that in German film studies, these kinds of musicals, they took over kind of the Krakauer line that this is not serious and not interesting. And much of it has to do with the fact, of course, that Krakauer was also gender blind, and that he could not get with the program that in Thiele's films in particular, especially through actresses like Lilian Harvey, he always had very strong women who essentially are controlling the narrative.
Yeah,
and so
dancing workers too. That would be the death blow to a communist who would not. What, opium for the masses? Why would they be dancing when they're suffering? So let's talk a little bit about how this film was made, right? Because you mentioned the fact that it was revolutionary for its time and technique. Let's nerd out for a little second and talk a little bit about the fact that this is actually an experiment in more than just what you just saw. There was another film that was made simultaneously, and this was a new strategy that Eric Palmer at UFA had developed, a very expensive versioning process that was meant to bridge the gap of this new medium of sound film. So at the time, of course, we already were experimenting with dubbing. 1927 is when the first sound film became popular in the States and was creating a wave that led more or less in 1929 to also Europe adopting sound film. So 1 year before this movie. And the main problem was that now all of a sudden silent films, you could just replace a card, a title card, and the dialogue was translated. How were you going to translate a film into multiple languages, in Europe especially? You had the Babylonian problem. All of a sudden people were not speaking the same language anymore. How are you translating these films? And so what was
what they did is they started doing multiple language versions. So they would use same script, more or less, same costumes, but oftentimes the same director, not always, but then switch out the actors. So they'd shoot a scene in one language and then in a second language. So in this film was made in a German version, and then it was made in a French version. And Leoline Harvey, because she spoke French and English really well, she was also in the French version, but the main actor was not Willy Fritsch, but Henri Garat. And so this multi-language version system stayed in effect for about 3 or 4 years. And after that, they got the dubbing technology was good enough so they didn't have to do that, because of course it was much more expensive to shoot multiple versions. Some films were shot, especially the UFA film operettas were shot in 3 versions, like Ich bei Tag und Du bei Nacht.
Correct.
I by day and you by night, 3 different versions. At Paramount Studios had a dépendance outside of Paris, and they were shooting up to 8 films in up to 8 different languages in that studio for the European market.
They had entire casts and staff directors come to the studio in Paris to make movies in all of these different languages. It was a big experiment. And of course, in Hollywood, this was also done. There's a very famous Dracula that was actually considered, the Spanish language Dracula is actually considered the better Dracula than the Hollywood English language version.
Well, in Los Angeles, in the period 1930-35, there were probably 60 to 80 American films done in Spanish language versions, and some of them were not even based on American scripts, but were only for the South American market. But shot in Hollywood.
Maybe we should stop nerding out about all of this, and let's talk about the fact that now that these directors and actors had made movies in the target language, some of them in English, some of them in France, when the Nazis came to power and decided no more Jews allowed, what happened is that people had calling cards. Some of them, people that were fortunate enough to have made version films, now had movies that they could show and say, I know how to make movies in France. I know how to make movies that work in English. These are the movies that I've made, and they can show them to producers. They could show them and then continue with their careers.
If they were lucky enough to have a print.
That's correct. And if they were lucky enough to make it out. So let's talk maybe a little bit about a few people that we saw on screen, some people behind the camera, and what happened once the Nazis came on.
So you know, in April of 1933, the UFA, on the 29th of April, one day before the Jewish boycott,
Yes.
fires every single Jewish employee. So from one day to the next, literally hundreds and hundreds of film directors, writers, actors, people behind the camera who had had incredible careers, who were upper middle class, were well-to-do, are suddenly without ability to make any kind of money and have to go somewhere else. But that wasn't so easy. First of all, the Nazi government set it up so you were only allowed to take out 30 German marks out of Germany. All your other income, whether it was millions or thousands of, and whether it was property, was confiscated as what was called the Reichsfluchtsteuer, which means, translates as the Reichsflight tax. And so these people were literally destitute. Some of them managed to get jobs in the French film industry for a while because there had been a lot of back and forth. Some of them in the English film industry. But ultimately, especially once the war started, there was really only Hollywood. So approximately 450 of these refugees actually ended up in Hollywood and had careers. But you know, some like Billy Wilder, who were young when they left and had only a few credits to their name, they had huge careers in the United States. Some like Wilhelm Thiele, who had had a huge career in Europe, not so much. He also he makes a few films in England. Then he goes to Hollywood, and he makes a film operetta in Hollywood, which is too European and flops.
Billy Wilder wrote the script.
Billy Wilder wrote the script, right?
But too European, yeah, in sensibility.
And then after that he made another film in 1936, The Jungle Princess, which was a huge success. It was a kind of a jungle film, but it had Dorothy Lamour in it. It was her first role, and not my generation, my father's generation. She was famous because she popularized the sarong, which was considered unbelievably sexy at the time. And so that film was hugely popular. But somehow Thiele was not able to translate that into parlay that into further work. And he ended up working as an assistant director to von Sternberg on another Viennese musical, against the wishes of his agent, who said, "You can't step down, you'll never get back up."
Become an assistant director after
And
being
it
a
kind of
director.
happened, because after that he was stuck in B films for the rest of his Hollywood career, and then after the war went into producing nonfiction films, documentaries, and then also worked in television.
Pioneer in television.
Pioneer in television. I mean, he shot 40 episodes of The Lone Ranger. He did a series of historical films that were financed by the DuPont company called Cavalcade of America, which were short little segments from American history. So he did continue working with periods of unemployment in between, but it was not really a huge career. And that's kind of par for most of the emigres, that a lot of them were either too old. Thiele was in fact, Thiele, when he got to the United States, was well over 40 already, closer to 50. Other directors were even older and had more chances. So it was really the younger ones like Wilder and people like that. Otto Preminger, Robert Siodmak, who had more careers because they were younger and able to, even if they started in B films, work their way up.
Yeah, and also Thiele, you have to understand that he was at the height of his career when he made films like this. But when he was in Hollywood, he was in survival mode. He was not only earning money for himself, he was earning money for the family that he had brought over. We're very proud and honored to have today with us in the audience Linda Thiele. Thank you so much for coming and for sharing your incredible heritage with us. Thank you so much. A lot of the pictures in the books have been kept and cherished by Linda and from her husband, the grandson of Wilhelm Thiele. And they are now part of this book, as well as her foreword. So you can read all about it in there. Wilhelm Thiele was...
Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say, yes, Wilhelm Thiele was a star maker. If you look at something, what he did for Dorothy Lamour, he did the same in France for Danielle Darrieux, who became a huge star, and Lillian Harvey, who after this movie got called to Hollywood. And you might know Lillian Harvey from Inglourious Basterds. She's also featured in that. She was incredibly famous at this time, thanks to Wilhelm Thiele. And she came to Hollywood, made a few films. Hollywood decided they were not going to keep her on for another contract, and so she had to return into Germany when it was already the Nazi regime. And so she negotiated a contract to only work with her then husband, or I think husband, Paul Martin, and was very much in charge of the tone of her pictures, made also films that had some American flavorings, often chose to
And
keep
she
a door
didn't do that
open.
many. She only did 2 or 3,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But the issue is that even though that the fact that she did that, and she actually helped some people escape, especially her choreographer who was gay and who was under threat because of the persecution of homosexuals under the Nazi regime. She helped him escape. She helped other people, and she became targeted by the Gestapo, and there was actually an investigation against her, and she was warned, and so she escaped to France, where she had a house, and tried to make a few movies there. But she really wanted to go back to Hollywood, which she eventually
She
did.
did. She
She
goes
did
to
during the war.
Hollywood in 1939 or 40.
Yeah.
But she can't get any work in Hollywood then because
She's
thought of as a Nazi because she had
Absolutely.
made these Nazi films. But,
absolutely.
but in terms of some of the other actors,
Mm-hmm.
Kurt Geron, who you see is the heavyset lawyer in the film, he was murdered in Auschwitz.
Yeah, so his story is really tragic, and it's all about location. So his story is the fact that he was actually an actor. He worked a lot with Brecht. He was in the original production of the Three Penny Opera, for instance. And he developed a career
He's in
as
the
a
Blue
director.
Angel.
He's in the Blue Angel.
Yeah.
He developed a career as a director as well as an actor at the specific time. And so that allowed him to actually go abroad and also start a career abroad, because he as well was of Jewish background. And so he had the misfortune of becoming extremely successful in the Netherlands. The Netherlands, where after the war broke out, he thought, oh, it's going to stay neutral. He even got a contract, a call to Hollywood by Paul Kohner, an agent that had escaped and was trying to get him out. And he refused it because he was doing so well in Holland. He was so immersed in his work until it was too late, and the Nazis came. He tried to do some cabaret. The interesting thing is, even into the concentration camps, he was a performer. He was still singing the Three Penny Opera on the stages, trying to keep people entertained and trying to survive. And
his last directorial effort is
my gosh,
actually a documentary film that the Nazis forced him to make in Theresienstadt, in Terezin, which for decades was known under the title of Hitler Gives the Jews a City. That's actually, now we know, is not the title. It was never released, but it was called Terezin or
it was only
Theresienstadt.
privately screened. But what basically happened is that after the Red Cross did an inspection of Theresienstadt, where they had staged every single spot that the Red Cross would go through to make it seem as though it was a paradise on earth, it was such a success, and the report was so glorifying of the concentration camps, that they thought, why not create a lie on film? And we have the director to do it in our concentration camp. Let's make him direct it. And they promised him all sorts of things. He was forced to direct it. Or to die. And and on I think the very last day in Auschwitz that the gas chambers were still active, he was brought in. He was and gassed in the very last day. Very, very sad.
Also, victims were the barmen. That was a very famous, popular singing group called the Comedian Harmonists, and they were hugely popular in Germany in the 20s and 30s. And they weren't all Jewish, but a lot of them were Jewish, and several of them also ended up being murdered in concentration camps.
That's right.
Happily, we have other actors like Felix Bressart, who plays the bailiff, the Kuckuck bailiff, who became a big star as a character actor in Hollywood with Lubitsch.
Ninotchka, Shop
Around the Corner, and not just with Lubitsch, with other films, but with standard MGM had quite a career as a character actor there. Oskar Karlweis, one of the three, he emigrated too, but his career, he made a couple of films, but his career never really took off in Hollywood. Heinz Rühmann, on the other hand, the smallest of the three with the round glasses, ended up becoming the most famous and popular actor in Germany in the Third Reich. And not only in the Third Reich, but throughout all of the 50s. He did that by divorcing his Jewish wife and sending her off to England, and then Goebbels let him have that career. So, and the last time you see Heinz Rühmann is in a film some of you may know, Wings of Desire, Wim Wenders. He has it.
Yeah, and then some people that have continued careers in the Nazi era, such as Olga Chechova, who plays the girlfriends that ultimately marries Lillian Harvey's father. Well, she actually was often considered, to be a collaborator. She was actually the related to, I think, the niece of Anton Chekhov, the great playwright, and she was considered to be a Nazi collaborator until recently. Someone did research and found out that she was actually a spy for the Soviets, and she was getting in on it. And interestingly enough, Thiele later, when he was already on the downward spiral in terms of career, where he was no longer working for the studios, but instead doing industrials, he made one specific film that kind of stands out, and that film is The Price of Freedom. And it was made in 1949 at the height of McCarthyism. And the story is that of a man that has a wake-up call about the freedom of the press by going to Germany and actually seeing what's going on there and what it can lead to when freedom of expression is smothered. And who plays in that film and tells this young American all about Germany, but a very important character, acting coach at the time, who is related to Olga Chechova.
Michael Chekhov.
Michael Chekhov. And so I can't, of course, I don't have any proof of that, but there has to be a connection between the casting of Michael Chekhov and Olga Chechova, who had already worked with Thiele on a previous silent film, Orient Express.
Price of Freedom is really interesting because, like Ben said, it was made in '48 at the height of the McCarthy era. But it's a short film, but it is really a complete anti-McCarthy, anti-witch hunt film, talking really about the responsibility of Americans to get involved in politics and also the importance of the freedom of the press. And of course, very topical today. And do we need to say more?
So we often hear with the emigres about the big exiles, Fritz Lang, of all of the people that were successful. This book that we edited and that we have wonderful contributors to really tried from all different angles, post-colonialism, gender, all sorts of, to revisit a career of someone that is so typical for this era, someone that lost so much to the rise of Nazism and to being exiled, and who is therefore both typical for that period, but atypical for the kind of scholarship that has been done on the period. So maybe with this, we could turn things over to Emily Zinn. Thank you so much, and audience questions.
Thank you so much for screening the film. It was a real revelation. I really enjoyed it. Question, I noticed at the beginning there was a credit to F.W. Murnau. Can you talk about, was there a relation there with Murnau?
The credit is for the F.W. Murnau Foundation. And the F.W. Murnau Foundation is the official owner of all rights to the UFA Film Company, but also lots of other
They say
films.
they are.
They say they are. It's kind of a... It's a little weird. I mean, you all know Nosferatu, right? Nosferatu was made by a Jewish company that went bankrupt in 1924 and had nothing to do with UFA, but Murnau Stiftung claims rights to that film. So they control all of these rights, and because they control the rights, they are often involved now also in distributing these films. And so the films was restored by Bundesarchiv, was it?
By the Murnau Stiftung.
It was done by the Murnau Stiftung. So they're actually doing digital versions, so they, because they continue to earn income from these films.
But to maybe more now in terms of we can address the fact that he really developed something in the silent era, which is incredible. The camera movements that really he became famous for. And in this case, the cameras with the sound era became extremely static. And you couldn't do these kinds of movements. So Thiele really developed something here with editing that was so rapid, and with the music that brought, and the movement, the body movement within the camera frame, that kind of replaced the movement that could not be done by the camera itself, because of the equipment being so hard to maneuver. So this is something that maybe also, if we think about later, when and the fact that this he had creative control over, but if you look at later in the Hollywood era, all of this would have been something in post-production that he would not have had control over as a contract director. So maybe that's why he did not develop a signature style that he was able to continue later on.
I think one of the reasons these films have that kind of fluidity to them is that in Hollywood, the cameramen were saying, well, the camera has to be in this box and it's static, but you still had to only shoot that. Whereas right from the start, the European directors, and not just Europeans, English directors like Hitchcock were saying, well, we can shoot these films silent and cut them and then add the soundtrack later.
You might have
but
noticed
Hollywood
some
wasn't.
scenes, yeah.
Hollywood thought, we have to shoot it and record it at the same time with the same moment, and therefore you get that kind of static imagery in Hollywood films.
And some scenes might have been out of sync a little bit. That was not an error in later kind of resynchronizing or something, or restoring the film. It was because the sound was recorded separately and placed on the film at the times so that it would create this illusion, and you could create more movement and all of that.
I'm curious about the quite disruptive gender dynamics of the film. And I'm wondering if this was typical of films of this period by other directors, or was this like, true of Weimar cinema of this period, or was this somewhat unique to Thiele?
Well, I think of course, Professor Petro knows all about the gender dynamics of Weimar cinema. But what we can say is that Thiele in particular, from the beginning, from his silent films onward, really is what pejoratively was termed a woman's director in Hollywood, a director who focused more on women. And so it's interesting that in not just this film, but almost all of Thiele films, you have very strong women and very weak men. Men who are indecisive, who don't really control things. There is nowhere, even in his American films, is there anywhere a macho male. They just don't exist. Jungle Princess, another perfect example. Ray Milland in that film is milquetoast. He gets pushed around by his fiancée, who's Anglo, and by this native woman when he goes native. So this was a clear kind of characteristic of all of Thiele's films.
All the way to his last film in Germany.
Yep.
Sabine and the 100 Men.
Right.
Where he creates a very a character that's very close to the Lillian Harvey character that and it's a remake of a Henry Koster film.
Henry from 100 Men and a Girl with Deanna Durbin. But in this last film, this teenager basically is pushing all the men around, including her father, who is symbolically castrated. He's a war veteran who had been in a Russian prisoner of war camp, so he can't play his violin anymore. So I mean, it's clear you have that dynamic where she is the one moving the narrative forward to save her father.
But to answer your question about whether this is typical for Weimar cinema, I wouldn't say it's typical for Hollywood cinema of the time. Even if you look at pre-code films, the gender dynamics are just not like this.
Yeah.
But in Weimar cinema, there is kind of a trope of women, at least in the sound era, which is my specialty. You would see women that are that have a lot of control over their lives, that are in jobs, that are controlling who they are going to be in a relationship with, what their future is going to look like. But there's always kind of this reversal toward the end where the secretary or the movie star or whatever it is ends up giving it all up for marriage. And it's almost, sometimes what's interesting, it's kind of artificially stuck onto the end as kind of like, oh, this is the happy end. We don't really believe in it, but there it is. And I don't think that it necessarily happens here, because we've had these dynamics that have really been established toward until the end. We have the reversal of, is this the end? No, we really still need a big finale. Even though it ends in marriage and it has this narrative structure, as Chris was saying, of the formal musical, it really disrupts all of that. It constantly tries to remind you, yes, you're watching a fantasy. Yes, this is not real life. But wouldn't it be nice? and it does that by constantly reminding you of the fact that it's not real, and that and it's never trying to deceive you. The fact that it's opium for the masses, really, that argument is not valid, because it's as if you're saying, here's opium, take it, but we're also going to take it away and remind you of reality, and then you can have some more, but we're just going to keep doing this until maybe you create this reality that we're all wanting. I don't know. That's at least my interpretation.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the actual music. What is this sort of body of work that Thiele is drawing on for the musical texture of the film? And there's one moment in particular that sort of twigged me into it, which was in the club when the four are meeting, and there's a song that all of the servers sing to Lily, and there's a use of like a steel guitar, which is a really, really sort of incongruous instrument given the rest of the score. So and it seems so American and so sort of contemporary. So I wonder if you can just like give a little bit of a flavor of where this music is coming from and what the landscape is of the sound in the film.
Yeah, it's popular German music. Like the comedian harmonists were very popular as singers on record. There's jazz influences, better said, German interpretations of jazz. And the composer is Werner Richard Heimann, who later became Lubitsch's composer in Hollywood. And he was classically trained, like almost all film composers, but was working more in a lighter vein. And it's also interesting to compare this, that because I reference operettas, some of the operetta as a form was practically dead in 1930. There were virtually no new operettas written after that. You know, Rudolf Frimmel and Strauss and all the people who had written before that were no longer writing. But the last really, really popular operetta in Germany was done by Erich Scharell, who did Congress Dances, and it was a film called Zum Weißen Rössel, which is the white horse, and is an inn, a country inn. And the music in that is really popular and jazz music, even though it's in this operetta form.
Was kann der Siegesmund dafür, dass so schön
Ja.
ist?
So that's where that kind of tradition comes from, and you have a number of other composers who ended up in Hollywood who are also working exactly in that same vein of light opera, operetta, moving into popular music.
But the thing is, to answer your question too, the music was composed for the film.
Yeah.
This music was highly popularized, and most people here that have grown up in or lived in a German environment might know some of these songs still, because they are still popular to this day. However, they originated with this film. They became popular as records on the side, but they were made for this film. And the way that they're embedded into the action is due to the fact that that Heimann was working with Thiele and the writers Franz Schulz and Paul Frank at the same time as it was developed. Heimann was there. He was there for the editing. He was there for the conception, for every stage of the production, and was very much involved in how this will work together. Eric Palmer as the producer, Thiele, everyone was working together as a group to create this work of art, from start to finish. And so the conception of it, and the comedian harmonists coming in to take back some of the musical themes and reinterpret them in a different manner to create a different effect, a different mood for a specific scene. All of that is orchestrated and calculated and arranged by the entire team who were working together to create something that works on a musical, visual. We have Franz Planner, who became incredible also cinematographer in the States, doing the cinematography here, which is beautifully restored here. This was a treat to see this movie in this kind of quality. Because of how incredible the cinematography is. But all of these incredible technicians coming together to work not separately, but in unison to make this movie.
And it's also not just a aesthetic strategy, it is a conscious marketing strategy. So the UFA, right from the beginning, is planning these films, these operetta films, in conjunction with record companies that are putting the music out.
Sometimes
with the same performers, sometimes with different performers, but kind of creating intermedia synergy back in 1930 when the term hadn't been even
before
invented
Star
yet.
Wars figurines and whatever. Right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it, and I thank you also for staying for the conversation, for the thought-provoking questions.
Thank you.